Brad Pitt is a real watch collector. He is a real Patek Philippe collector, Cartier collector. We've been talking about Brad Pitt's watch collection for a long time. And today we're talking about three Patek Philippe Nautilus watches that I think are really interesting, that he's wearing a lot right now. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Surfshark. More on them later. And this is going to be a great episode. We're going to talk about these three Nautilus watches that he's been wearing a ton lately. And I think he's been wearing these watches a ton for a very simple reason. Brad Pitt is an elegant man. Brad Pitt has always been well-dressed. Brad Pitt has always been very much like the, well, he was Ocean's 11, right? He was the younger, fitter, kind of like sexier, but still within the George Clooney kind of idea that a gentleman should be well-dressed, that a gentleman should idolize sort of the Rat Pack, right? As opposed to, a lot of other, folks that, don't really kind of romanticize that era of elegance, right? So there's that baseline of elegance with him, but he is the sporty guy. Brad Pitt made so much of his career being, kind of a sporty bit of a sex symbol. So he represents this kind of middle ground of culture, which is the intersection of old world elegance and sport, and sport. Period. And there are only very few watches that really live at that intersection perfectly. There are elegant watches like Patek Philippe's Calatrava, Rolex's Cellini, so many Piagets, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are sports watches like so many IWCs, like so many Panerais, and the list can go on and on. But there are very few watches that actually capture both of those kind of identities in one. And the Patek Philippe Nautilus, I think, reigns above them all. In the group, you've got the Nautilus, you've got Audemars Piguet's Royal Oak, you've got IWC's Ingenieur. Brad Pitt is a partner of IWC, by the way. But the Patek Philippe Nautilus executes that kind of intention flawlessly. It does what the Royal Oak set out to do, but even better, in a more elegant, more refined manner. And I think that that is the reason why this watch, this model, has been on Brad Pitt's wrist for so long. It has been the collection that he's been seen wearing more than any other. He has Cartier Tank Guichets, he's got complicated Pateks, but it always seems that he ends up with a Patek Philippe Nautilus. So today we're talking about three of those watches. And the third watch, which is a reference 3700, is heavy with patination. And I think that that is going to open the door at the end of this conversation toward something more applicable to the masses, something that's more relevant to the rest of us. This idea of, patination. What does this detail do to a model? What does it do to his Patek Philippe? What does it do to a $500 Tissot, et cetera, et cetera? So today's conversation, while on a level is out of touch, at the end does become applicable and practical for everybody. So let's get into it. Three watches. Number one, Patek Philippe's 5711, the modern Nautilus. The Nautilus under its reign, the Nautilus became the world's most sought after watch, essentially. 2006, 2010, the Nautilus was a cool Patek that people, liked, but, whatever, it wasn't that big of a deal. And yet under its reign, before its discontinuation a handful of years ago, the 5711 skyrocketed in value. It went from $27,000 on the secondary market up to $140,000. I mean, it saw hype and it saw publicity and appreciation unlike anything that the watch market really had ever seen. Sure, there are the really wild, out-of-touch things like Richard Mille that were very volatile. But, these Nautilus watches, even after they had peaked, did not plummet the way that some of those really volatile, crazy Richard Milles did, right? So this Nautilus is probably, if we were to make a list of the kings of watches, the Nautilus would be one of those watches. Now, I think it's interesting that these watches really became super popular around COVID because Brad Pitt had been wearing this watch publicly for many years prior. So that, again, establishes that he was, and I'm using these words a little bit lightly, but he wasn't following, the wave. He wasn't following the people. He was thinking for himself, an independent thinker. He had his own taste, and this watch resonated with him, and he wore it all the time. So far as, rich guy sports watches go, the Nautilus is pretty damn great. To you and I, it may not be a beater, but to, a guy with a ton of money like Brad Pitt, that's pretty perfect runaround watch. So this goes back a very long time. In a really recent photo shoot with George Clooney, Brad Pitt wore exclusively an original Nautilus, and not just the original Nautilus, not just reference 3700, which was the original jumbo reference, but a 3700 yellow gold with a matching yellow dial. These watches are really rare, and it also does show, a willingness to err on the side of luxe and elegant, as opposed to the sporty side, right, which that watch does saddle, but in different metals, it can be pushed either way. I will also say, by the way, it's worth noting, these watches were also manufactured in two-tone. And here's a photo of one in a listing. At $100,000, these watches actually represent way more value than your average 5711, by the way. Just saying. Proportions are better. It's thinner. Everything about this watch is original. It's original to the intention of Gerald Genta, the genius designer behind this watch. 5711, I think, is a more modern and somewhat compromised version of that. It's not as perfect. It's great. I would love one, but it's not as perfect. And these watches in two-tone, and by the way, two-tone is like totally cool, always has been, work really well. Not everyone's cup of tea, but work really well. Just wanted to throw that in there for the people out there that are looking for a $100,000 vintage watch. And believe it or not, many of you are. God bless you all. This watch, I think, was really cool, really decisive. It screams, right? I think it's interesting and worthy of note that like George Clooney has a really big ambassador deal with Omega that I don't believe for a second. I think that generally speaking in people's lives, things make sense. The things that you own and the brands that you own somewhat align to each other. And I don't think that George Clooney's lifestyle or his mansion in Lake Como or any of it is the watch or car or house equivalent of Omega. I think that relationship is contrived, to be honest with you. Whereas I can see it more with James Bond because he's sporty and always about to die, and it makes more sense. George Clooney, I don't believe for a second. But I really like that Brad Pitt has chosen not to do that. I really like that Brad Pitt has retained his kind of independence and said, basically, I like watches and I'll be a brand ambassador for a brand, but like I wear my own watches and I have a passion for watches and I'm not going to only wear yours. It would be disingenuous. And that's what happened with Kevin Hart as well. Kevin Hart is a Audemars Piguet brand ambassador that has said on multiple occasions that he kind of gets bored and wishes he wasn't contractually obligated to only wear Audemars Piguet. So I really like how sincere Brad Pitt is when he puts on a vintage yellow gold 3700. It shows that he, has that balance of sport and elegance. He really likes yellow gold. He's open to it, and he really gets vintage. Shows you he's a real freaking watch guy. I really like that. A quick note from our sponsor of today's episode, our friends over at Surfshark. Surfshark allows you to virtually travel the world, browse privately by encrypting your internet activity, blocking ads and malware that get in your way, and more. Internet security to me is, in fact, the idea of not having internet security, the idea of not using a VPN, specifically Surfshark, is insane. There's an entire world of predatory actors out there that are attempting to, in one way or another, kind of ruin your life. It actually happened to me fairly recently, and it's scary, and it feels like you're being watched because you are actually being watched. And I understand that, like, if you would have talked 5 years ago about, having a VPN, the idea was maybe only for early adopters, but now we are aware of all the dangers to our security online, and having a partner like Surfshark that allows you to actually browse the internet as you are going to regardless, but now with safety, with protection, is truly invaluable. The idea of not having it truly, for me, induces a remarkable amount of anxiety. We are so vulnerable to these malicious actors online, so we need to be responsible and have our own protection. And you can through Surfshark with no strings attached, basically a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like it. And if you use the code Theo and Harris, you get an extra 4 months of Surfshark for free. That is surfshark.com/Theo and Harris to get an additional 4 months of Surfshark to browse safely for free. So head on over. Thank you to Surfshark for the security you provide to myself and the community, and see you again soon. But now the third watch here is the centerpiece of the next portion of the conversation, which is, again, a reference 3700, same reference as the yellow gold one he's wearing with George Clooney, but now in stainless steel and with a patinaed dial or a patinated dial. This is the centerpiece of the conversation because I think this watch is endlessly interesting. The 3700, while I love it in yellow gold, I love it in two-tone, the 3700 was intended to be made in steel. The 3700 is a steel watch. It was manufactured in gold, but it's a watch that in its DNA, it is supposed to be a statement, right? A declaration that this brand, this designer was able to make a watch in stainless steel that could still be luxury. Making it in yellow gold kind of, defeats the whole purpose of the watch itself, right? The Nautilus and the Royal Oak were invented to prove that stainless steel could be luxury. So manufacturing yellow gold does defeat its own purpose. Now, that being said, I still love it, but I love that this watch is in stainless steel. And I love that it's patented, particularly because it's so expensive and it's so luxurious and it's so fine and so elegant. I think this watch with patentation is essentially Gerald Genta's mission. I think this watch represents his end goal, which was to create a sports watch for the ultra wealthy that they could and would actually wear and beat up, and it would work. It would suit their luxurious lifestyle where they wanted to show off and flex and still patronize their favorite brands like Patek Philippe. And they wouldn't have to baby it the way they would a Calatrava, and yet it would be equally luxurious. That's cool. That was the point that Gerald Genta set out to achieve. And a beaten patented example embodies that point and the success of the endeavor better than a perfectly preserved example. Perfectly preserved examples are incredible. We love them. We respect them. But the patentation shows that this watch did survive, that the dream that was the Nautilus worked. It worked. It wasn't just a design on paper or on a napkin or wherever the hell it was made. It actually worked, and wealthy people actually used them, and the whole idea was correct. The thesis was correct. And that's why I love the patentation. I also happen to think it's absolutely beautiful to see these dials. Each one is unique. Here's another photo of a Royal Oak with some really light patentation that we just recently reviewed at London Jewelers, episode coming to you soon. So subscribe to our channel for more. But I love seeing these watches like this. I love the color. I love the caramel tones. I love that Brad Pitt appreciates that as well, right? Because it takes some understanding and depth in vintage watches to start to get why patentation is cool. Because if you're not into vintage, patentation is just bad. It's flawed. It's not good. Right? I have always been an advocate for patentation. I've been an advocate for patentation in $2,000 vintage Omegas. This is an amazing Rolex date with a smooth bezel that has just been worn to hell. I mean, its dial is all different shades of brown and speckle, and it's all flawed. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, right? There's a flaw, but it's a happy flaw. It's a happy accident, and that's kind of how I truly do see these things. I've always loved watches with patentation, and I like that, Brad Pitt gets it too. It's something that is for vintage people, and it's something that if you understand where it's coming from, the story, the accidental beauty of a unique piece that developed on its own throughout its own journey. If you buy into that, that's freaking cool. And then you have immaculate patented watches like the Le Jour that's currently in the shop right now, unlike this date, which has a pattern that people would say, okay, what happened here? The Le Jour, if you told someone that was born chocolate, they would just believe it. Because it has no speckling, it has no spotting, it has no staining. It's just, it was black, and it perfectly aged to brown, to milk brown, milk chocolate. I mean, that's so cool. So it's different strokes for different folks. And whereas with the Omega Seamaster in the shop right now, it wasn't born that way. It's pretty much, kind of flawless. I mean, it doesn't have staining or dots or specks, or it doesn't have that kind of stuff. But you can tell it wasn't born that way. It's just even patination. But you could actually, the way the Le Jour aged, you can actually tell. And this isn't just about the watches in our shop. These are the watches on your wrist, the watches from your grandfather's closet. These are the watches that you see at your average watch store, right? Like your average vintage watch or vintage, kind of shop. You're going to see patina. You're going to see patination. And all I'm going to do is encourage you to do two things, or a couple of things. One, have an open mind. Have an open mind to the beauty of the story and the journey. Have an open mind to the reliability of these watches, because it can still be completely serviced back to factory specifications, mechanically speaking. So don't be, always be cautious with everything, but don't have an irrational fear of these things. And then ask yourself, all of that aside, all of that drum beating aside, do I actually find this beautiful? And that to me is paramount. Do I actually find this beautiful? Because I think in many cases, these watches, all bullshit aside, can actually be more beautiful with patina than the way they were originally intended and manufactured. That's truly how I feel. That is truly how I feel. There are so many watches that I've seen that I say, holy shit, so many Submariners, so many Daytonas that I say, wow, I can't believe they didn't make them that way from factory, because they should have. The chocolate is just so gorgeous and delicate and rich, you know? So anyway, that's my spiel about Brad Pitt's watch collection, his Nautilus collection. He's got so many other pieces, but I think that his regular wearing of these Nautilus watches is really interesting. I love talking about it. And of course, a little self-serving, somewhat conversation about patina. If you enjoy vintage watches, if you enjoy patina, head on over to the Theo and Harris Watch Shop and take a look at some of these watches, like this Rolex Date or this Lejour that I just mentioned, which is just absolutely stunning. And that's it. Head on over, subscribe, and I'll see you all soon. Watches, particularly vintage watches, represent this intersection of history, of design, of engineering. Theo and Harris is a family business. It always has been. And that's because we, my family, all share a passion for this remarkable intersection. For nearly a decade now, we have scoured the world from Oklahoma to Tokyo for some of the most interesting watches by some of the world's most revered manufacturers to share with our community. We handpick our collection, we look for quality, and we look for taste. We choose watches that, for one reason or another, speak to us. We authenticate them, we service them so they're ready for decades of memories to come, and then we share them here with you. We support our clients. We believe in expedited and fully insured shipping so they never have to wait. We believe in stress-free returns in the off chance they change their mind. We believe in building relationships that last. Theo and Harris is a family business. And we haven't just built a shop, we've built a community. So whether you're considering adding a vintage watch to your collection, a handmade strap to your life, or if you're just looking to talk watches, we're grateful that you've chosen us.